You're at a family dinner. Everything's fine. The food is good. The conversation is flowing. And then someone, usually an aunt or a well-meaning friend, leans in and asks, "So, when are you having kids?" And just like that, the air changes. You feel it in your chest. That tightness. That split second where you have to decide. Do you tell the truth? Or do you give them the answer that'll make this conversation end faster? So you smile. You say something vague like, "Oh, we'll see." Or maybe someday. Knowing full well that someday means never. And the moment they move on to the next topic, you exhale. Because you just avoided an interrogation disguised as curiosity. If you're someone who genuinely, deeply, completely does not want children, and you're tired of being told you'll change your mind, welcome. You're about to feel extremely validated. Today, we're diving into the psychology of people who don't want kids. The ones society calls selfish, immature, or incomplete. But science? Science has a very different story to tell. Here's the thing nobody wants to admit. Wanting kids isn't universal. It's not hardwired into every human being like hunger or thirst. And yet, we've built an entire cultural narrative around the idea that parenthood is the default, the inevitable, the thing that makes you a real adult. If you don't want kids, people don't just question your choice. They question your humanity. What's wrong with you? Who hurt you? You'll regret it when you're older. As if the only possible explanation for not wanting children is that you're damaged, confused, or going through a phase. But here's what the research actually shows. A 2021 study from the University of Michigan found that people who are child-free by choice report the same levels of life satisfaction, purpose, and happiness as parents, and in some cases, higher. They're not missing a fundamental human experience. They're just experiencing life differently. Let's break down the psychology behind why some people opt out of parenthood entirely, and why their brains, their values, and their wiring make this the most honest decision they could make. First, let's talk about the autonomy protector. This person values freedom above almost everything else. Not in a selfish, hedonistic way, but in a deep, identity-level way. Their life is built around the ability to make spontaneous decisions, to pivot when opportunities arise, to travel, to create, to explore without being tethered to another human being's constant needs. For them, having kids wouldn't just be a responsibility. It would be the end of the self they've carefully built. Psychologists call this agency preservation. Some people need autonomy the way others need connection. It's not that they can't sacrifice. It's that the kind of sacrifice required by parenthood feels like erasing themselves. And they've decided their own existence is worth protecting. Research from the Journal of Marriage and Family found that people high in autonomy need are significantly less likely to want children, and when they don't have them, they report no regret. They're not running from responsibility. They're running toward a life that actually fits who they are. Then there's the realist. This person has looked at the world, at the climate crisis, at political instability, at economic collapse, at the mental health epidemic, and they've asked themselves a question most people refuse to ask. Is it ethical to bring a child into this? And they've concluded, no. This isn't pessimism. It's pattern recognition. They see the data. They see the suffering. And they think, why would I create a person who will have to navigate all of this? Some people call this depressing. Psychologists call it existential clarity. A 2020 study found that people who choose not to have kids due to environmental or ethical concerns score higher in critical thinking and long-term planning. They're not avoiding life. They're thinking 10 steps ahead and deciding that creating more life isn't the answer. They carry a quiet grief that no one talks about, the grief of loving the world enough to not add to its burden. But let's go deeper, because some people don't want kids because of childhood wounds, and this is where it gets uncomfortable. Maybe they grew up in chaos with parents who weren't ready, who were abusive, neglectful, or just emotionally absent. And now, as adults, they know something crucial. They don't trust themselves not to repeat the cycle. This isn't self-hatred. It's self-awareness. Psychologists call this intergenerational trauma interruption. They've identified the patterns, and instead of gambling with another human being's well-being, they've chosen to let the cycle end with them. Studies on adverse childhood experiences show that people who experience trauma are more likely to be child-free, not because they hate kids, but because they respect them enough not to risk harming them. That's not selfish. That's one of the most responsible decisions a person can make. Then we have the identity-first individual. This is the person whose sense of self is so deeply tied to their work, their art, their mission, their craft, that parenthood feels like it would dilute everything they're trying to build. They're not saying kids aren't valuable. They're saying their path requires a level of focus, obsession, and energy that children would fracture. Think of the artists, the scientists, the activists, the creators who've said, "I can't do both and I choose this." History is full of them. Virginia Woolf, Frida Kahlo, Nikola Tesla, people whose contributions to the world required them to opt out of traditional family structures. Research from the Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin found that people high in creative drive and career ambition are statistically less likely to want children, and they don't experience the meaning deficit that society insists they will. Their meaning comes from creation of a different kind. They're not missing out. They're all in on something else. And here's a type that often gets misunderstood: the sensory-sensitive non-parent. This person knows, deeply, that they cannot handle the noise, the mess, the unpredictability, the constant demands that come with children. They're not being dramatic. They have a nervous system that requires order, quiet, and control to function. Psychologists recognize this as part of sensory processing sensitivity. For them, the thought of a screaming toddler, sleepless nights, and relentless overstimulation isn't just unappealing, it's destabilizing. And they're honest enough to admit, "I would not thrive in that environment, and neither would a child raised by someone who's constantly overwhelmed." A 2019 study found that highly sensitive people who remain child-free report better mental health outcomes than highly sensitive people who became parents out of obligation. They're not avoiding responsibility. They're avoiding a mismatch that would hurt everyone involved. Now let's talk about the relationship prioritizer. This is the person who chose a partner, not a co-parent. They built a life centered on intimacy, adventure, deep connection, and they don't want to add a third person to that equation. Not because they're afraid of sharing love, but because they know that children fundamentally change the dynamic of a romantic relationship. Studies show that marital satisfaction drops significantly after the birth of a first child and takes years to recover, if it ever does. The relationship prioritizer has looked at that data and decided, "I'd rather protect what we have than risk losing it." They're not selfish. They're intentional. Research from the Journal of Personality shows that child-free couples who made a mutual decision report higher relationship satisfaction than couples who had kids because it was the next step. Then there's the financial pragmatist. This person has done the math. The USDA estimates it costs over $300,000 to raise a child to age 18 in the US, and that's not including college. They look at their student loans, their rent, their stagnant wages, and they think, "I can barely take care of myself. How am I supposed to raise a whole human being?" This isn't materialism. It's survival math. And unlike previous generations, they're not willing to bring a child into financial instability and hope it works out. Economists have noted that younger generations are increasingly opting out of parenthood due to economic anxiety, and they're not wrong to do so. They're being more responsible than the people who have kids they can't afford and then struggle for decades. But here's the most important type: the honest self-knower. This person just doesn't want kids. There's no trauma, no ethical crisis, no financial worry. They just feel nothing when they imagine parenthood. No pull, no yearning, no sense of something's missing. And in a world that insists everyone secretly wants children deep down, this person's indifference is radical. Psychologists call this non-parent identity clarity. They know who they are, and who they are is someone who doesn't want to be a parent. Studies show that people with high self-awareness who remain child-free have some of the lowest rates of midlife regret. They're not in denial. They're in alignment. Here's what nobody tells you. Not wanting kids doesn't mean you hate children. It doesn't mean you're selfish, broken, or immature. It means you know yourself well enough to make a decision most people are too scared to even question. Because let's be honest, a lot of people have kids because they think they're supposed to, because their parents expect it, because their friends are doing it, because they're afraid of being alone when they're old. But you You've looked at all of that and said, that's not a good enough reason to create a life. So the next time someone tells you you'll change your mind, remember this. The regret rate for people who don't have kids? About 6%. The regret rate for people who do? Some studies suggest as high as 20%. You're not the one making the risky decision. Did this resonate? Are you child-free by choice and tired of defending it? Drop your truth in the comments. And if you found this validating, subscribe. We don't tell you what to think. We just explain why you think it. Your call.